Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Mirror of Intimacy monthly meditation. Today's meditation is on sexual orientation. It's Monday, April 9th, or April 6th, rather, sorry, and I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis, talking to you from Center for Healthy Sex in Los Angeles on a beautiful spring rainy day we have today. I hope you're all faring well in the midst of this shutdown and that you are stable and doing your best to stay home, to make sure you're distancing from other people and keeping yourself and your family safe. If we look at the quote by Tennessee Williams today in our entry in Mirror of Intimacy, he writes, "What is straight? A line can be straight or a street, but the human heart, oh no, it's curved like a road through mountains." And I love that because this idea that our sexuality is binary, it's either this or that, or limited in some ways, is really an old-fashioned construct. And science is bearing that out also, that if we really think about our sexual orientation, some of us are very clear about what it is, that it's just one way or the other, and that's it. And we never really think much about it. But in that lack of thinking about it, it doesn't leave much room for exploration or unexpected realizations about possibilities. And I want to be careful here because there are people who think that people promote homosexuality, as opposed to recognizing that people that are gay and lesbian and trans will tell you that they knew this very, very early on. They knew it as young as 5 years old. So this is not something that's typically acquired. It's something that we're usually born with. And people don't decide to turn gay any more than people decide they're going to be straight. They just are what they are. And what I'm hoping from this conversation is that we come away with a lot more fluidity in our thinking, if you will. So when we just limit ourselves again to male and female or straight and gay, we're really limiting the unbounded iterations of human sexuality. And so we want to be able to cultivate respect and tolerance towards other people's struggles for their own authenticity, especially when you're in a political climate that privileges conformity. And even on the news today, I heard something just horrific, that there are white supremacy terrorist groups around the world, specifically in Russia right now, that are forming and forging, and they're on the new terrorist watch list worldwide. And the way that gay people are treated in countries like Russia or the Middle East and other countries is just beyond horrific. It's just chilling that, you know, like skin color, people's sexual orientation would make them other and make them targets of hatred. It's just so difficult for me to personally understand because we're all human beings. So it's important for us to have respect and tolerance to our own confusions, our own differences, our own explorations, so that we can extend that to other people as well. So Seth writes, I'd like to assume it's an interaction between nature, genetics, and nurture, personal experiences. And I think that's probably accurate. A person probably can choose to be gay in the sense of their willingness or unwillingness to explore that both in their minds and then actually physically with their bodies. Well, I think both of those are true. I think long gone is the conversation about whether it's nature or nurture. It can be both. But there are people who absolutely will tell you, I knew I was gay when I was 5 years old, and that's just how it is and how it was. And other people who maybe had bad sexual experiences early on, say, you know, a boy was molested by a male, an adult male, and over time he started to have attraction to having sex with men, even though his idea of relationship was with a female. So we could say that he's more homoerotic, but hetero-emotional. So he wants to get his emotional needs met from a female, but he enjoys sex with males also. That same person might call himself heteroflexible. Someone else might say that they're bisexual, that they could be in a relationship with either a male or a female. With heteroflexibility, though, I think it's about lifestyle. And I like to think about gay as a lifestyle, that if you want to set up a house with someone, a life with someone, if you imagine walking down the beach holding hands with someone, would it be with someone of the opposite sex or the same sex? And if it's the opposite sex, that's really more about the life of or a lifestyle of being gay versus someone who wants to be in relationship with a female, but enjoys receiving pleasure from men, but doesn't want to live with a man, doesn't want to cuddle with the guy necessarily, or have dinner parties with the guy. He would prefer to do that with a female. So you can start to see how unique and different this is for people. And so much so that there is a newer phrase that's sort of out there, and it's called gender sex relationship diversity. And that phrase allows us to put everything under one umbrella: asexuality, demisexuality, gay, straight, bi, queer, pansexual. I mean, there's so many different iterations of sexuality today that we really can't keep them all straight. So this notion of gender sex relationship diversity is really a nice umbrella term that encompasses all of that. So we can expand our identity, certainly. Like, I primarily identify as heterosexual, but it doesn't mean that I'm not open to the possibility of loving another female. In fact, I love my girlfriends deeply. I love them like sisters and family members. I think they're beautiful also. I think their bodies are beautiful and their minds. And so I'm not afraid of being in a loving place with other women. Whether or not I want to have sex with them is a different matter, and that's a personal choice. And if I did, that wouldn't necessarily make me gay or lesbian. It would just mean that I was open to pleasure. You could say it that way. And I think that's true for all of us if we're open-minded enough for that exploration. And so you can try these different energies and expand these ideas by way of role playing in your primary relationship. Even in a committed relationship, you can try on these different energies where you're gender bending or playing in these arenas. And for people who are single, you can try dating outside of your stated sexual orientation and see what happens. You might find like, yeah, that wasn't really for me, or wow, that was really exciting or interesting. And so we want to make sure we're challenging these preferences we have for type, for body type and age, and other preconceived categories that we grew up thinking was right for us because we told we were. And along these lines, there's even a phenomenon or a movement in all women's colleges called LUG, which many of you have probably heard about, but LUG is an acronym that sounds for lesbian until graduation. And this phenomena occurs because all these young women are in a girls' college for 4 years with each other. And so they figure having a girlfriend and having sex is better than not having sex at all. And many of these women know that they're not necessarily lesbian, or they don't identify as straight or gay. They're just trying their sexuality on and having experiences. And we want to make a space for people to do that. So someone writes, hi, Alex, isn't part of the problem with understanding sexual orientation is that we've been conditioned in this culture to think in binary terms, or rather not in a more fluid or spectral way on this topic? And I would say, yes, that's exactly what I'm pointing to, is that we are too limited in our way of thinking. And I really think that, this binary notion is slowly but surely getting ground down because people are, so different in their preferences for many things. Paul writes, I've spent most of my life attracted to women. I've only dated women and have been married for 15 years, but in the last few years, I've had increasing sexual fantasies about men. I found gay pornography very stimulating of late, though I never liked it before. I'm still attracted to my wife and have struggled with these fantasies because I've kept them secret. Do you have thoughts about how to handle these divergent feelings, the secrecy and the shame? Well, my hope is, and this could be, a big point of change in your marriage is that you could talk about this to your wife. And the problem that people mostly have in their relationships, especially a long-term relationship, is that we get very entrenched in ideas about who our partner is and how they're supposed to show up and how they're supposed to be. And we can get entrenched in our own ideas about ourselves also, because we do this in a way to sort of lock everything down, so we give ourselves a false sense of security. But it doesn't make a space for both parties to grow and to change. And so to be able to sit down with your partner and to say, you know what, lately I've looked at gay porn and I got to tell you, there's something really arousing about this to me and I don't know what it is. Are you open for a conversation? And somebody who is solid in themselves is going to have a reaction to that. It's probably going to be scary because I can imagine that woman thinking, oh my God, is my husband gay? As opposed to, wow, this is interesting, or this is a new chain of events. And how do I settle myself down? How do I manage my own judgment and anxiety and fear and listen with curiosity about what about that turns you on and what do you like about it? And, you know, have you had these thoughts previously? And where do you imagine you would go in order to have this experience? Or would you have this experience out of our marriage? So in other words, you're in a space opening conversation. And that doesn't mean that you, Paul, would ever go out and have sex with a man. It just means the act of having a conversation with your partner has you feeling less shame about it and less like you have to do it in secrecy, which could have you eventually going out of the marriage and blowing up your marriage if she ever found out about it. So these are the kind of challenges that we're faced with today in long-term relationships when we have access to so many different ways of looking at sex and sexuality. So I hope that's helpful for you to think about it in that way. And just because you find images of men having sex arousing does not necessarily make you gay. It just means that it's arousing to you. Now, I think a couple that is really willing to explore these things together would be willing to bring those fantasies into their sex life, where they're talking to each other about what the fantasy is. And maybe the person who's attracted to the same sex, let's say there's a female who's attracted to other women and she tells her partner about it, her male partner, and they evoke a fantasy together where there's another female in bed with them, perhaps. And so the female never has to leave the marriage to go have sex with someone else. They bring the fantasy into the relationship, and that novelty creates dopamine, which creates higher levels of arousal between the two. And this can be a fun way to role play and sort of spice up your sex life. But it also requires that both parties not be threatened by the possibility of something other than what they're used to doing. And that means that you have to create a lot of safety. You have to promise each other that you're not going to cheat, you're not going to go outside of the relationship, and if you do, you're going to be, your partner is going to be the first person that knows, not the last person to find out. Someone asks, can you refer to specific evidence-based science of non-binary genders, of fluidity? There is an article that comes to mind immediately, but I cannot, the title of it just slipped my mind and I don't know the authors of that paper. But if you were to go to Google Scholar and type this in, I think you will find peer-reviewed journal articles on this matter. There's a book by Jane Ward called Not Gay, and you might want to take a look at that, where she looked at specifically white straight men seeking sex with men. And these men were having sex sheerly for pleasure, not because they identified as gay at all, and they weren't interested in having relationships with men, but they did enjoy sex with men just for fun. I wish I could pull up that paper for you, and if there's a way for me to do it, or if a way for us to send it out afterwards, I will. But increasingly, we're seeing science on this matter. So how can we um, deal with this unexpected attraction, like Paul was writing to us? He never before liked this possibility. Um, and he all of a sudden is surprised by this, and now it feels a little bit threatening. And that's what can happen when you start to explore your sexual preferences. um, do you feel threatened because you're attracted to the same sex? Because this might expose our vulnerability. It really also impinges on our ideas of who we think we are and how we make meaning of who we are. And what does it say about me if I find a naked woman's body beautiful? Maybe it says nothing. Maybe it just says that that's beautiful. And just by the way, there are studies too that show that women are actually quite sexually fluid. That when women are showed images of sex, whether it's bonobos, which are, a form of primate having sex, males, females having sex, lesbian women having sex, they lubricate. And so women are pretty fluid across the board, and we've always known this about females. But I think what's coming out more and more now is that men are fluid in their own ways. It's just more threatening for males to talk about this. There is a book called A Billion Wicked Thoughts, where they talk about studies that show that large penises in pornography are specifically there for men, not women, because women aren't that interested in large penises. It turns out men watch the size of the penis in pornography far more than women do. And that's why these sort of extraterrestrial sized penises are in porn. Someone says, I identify myself not as straight, and I am in a mixed orientation marriage. I came out to my wife almost 4 years ago. I've come to this identity of my sexual orientation since I feel it's fluid. More than anything, I guess I just wanted to say it's okay to have some same-sex attraction. And I would say, good for you. And that's really courageous and brave. There are people that are in, living in all sorts of configurations today. And I appreciate your courage to be able to, first of all, admit it to yourself, and then to also be able to talk to your wife about it, and for her to be open enough to understand it and not feel threatened. I mean, so often we make other people's sexual issues about us. Like, oh my God, there's something wrong with me. Like, I'm not feminine enough or sexy enough. And it's not about you. Your partner is who they are, and you are who you are. And these explorations are simply an exploration of ourselves. Someone says, you mentioned finding ways to bring the same-sex fantasy into the relationship bedroom. How could you do this in a way that you would still be in the room with the woman or man you are with? I've wanted to have anal sex with a strap-on with my wife, but I worry that she'll think I'm fantasizing about men, someone that's not her. Well, before you do that, you have to have some really long and important conversations with your wife. You've got to talk to her about what about this is arousing, why you like it, what effect does it have on her? Is she willing to try it? What scares her about it? She has to feel incredibly safe before you start to introduce something like a strap-on with her. You can't just all of a sudden show up with that, because that's going to feel incredibly threatening to her physical body, threatening to the relationship, threatening because she doesn't know what it means to you. So these conversations require much, much respect on the person who's introducing the change, and making sure that you are taking care of your partner first and foremost. Your partner should be the most important person in this conversation, not your desire to speed this up or look at more porn or go buy a sex toy. This has to be done together with each other so that it is consensual. And if it's not consensual, you don't have a green light. And then you have different conversations. When it comes to sex addiction, can you speak about cross-gender lines and how this can be very confusing for a partner, wondering if their partner is bisexual or gay? Well, I mean, first and foremost, if somebody is in recovery from sex addiction, they have to look at their behaviors that are compulsive first. And the compulsive behaviors are the problematic behaviors. But in recovery, when people are able to stop the compulsive behaviors, they're able to stop the lying and the cheating, and the gaslighting, and they have long-term sobriety, at least a year or two, and then they're willing to do some serious work about, what they prefer sexually, which, is one of the reasons that I wrote my workbook, Sexual Reflections, which is a very detailed, granular look at what does the person really like sexually, and how much do they deny themselves because of shame, how much of what they like is a trauma repetition, and how much of it lands on the side of their addiction. When somebody can really be very clear about what they like sexually, and they're not engaging in it in a secretive way, shaming way, compulsive way, then this is a conversation again between the couple. But it's really incumbent upon the person who's in recovery to do a whole lot of work about that, again, so that their partner doesn't feel threatened by the behaviors they're introducing. And this sort of goes back to what Paul was saying, is that, you're saying, I worry that she'll think I'm fantasizing about a man, someone that's not her. Then it's your responsibility to be talking to her during sex, to be telling her what she looks like, how you feel about her, what it feels like, how much you want her, desire her, love her. Because if you're making eye contact with her, if you're present with her, then you're not going to drift off into fantasy about someone else. So this is a conversation about adult sexuality, which means you have to be super responsible and highly intentional on the front end. This is not something that you can just all of a sudden introduce in a way that will really destroy your relationship if you're not careful. Someone says, are there studies for people, or why people are more open to these conversations or fluid lifestyles? I don't know. And again, I would turn you to Google Scholar and to start doing some, searching and looking at the research yourself to see. This one paper that I'm thinking about that I teach, that I cannot think of the name of, I think it's called Sexuality Redefined. That's what it's called, Sexuality Redefined. Gives you all sorts of references and research on this topic. And I can try to see if I can find this real quickly. So someone says, let's see, I'm in recovery, and what I've been told from my sponsor in SLAA is that when beginning a relationship, we often dive too deeply into sharing ourselves without appropriate boundaries. But I myself feel as though having conversations about self and preference, especially about sexuality, is important to do to encourage an open and honest communication. From the beginning. Can you speak a little bit about how an appropriate and healthy relationship is developed in order to enhance the honesty around sexual preferences and the ability to share one another's true self up front rather than waiting years? But how do we do so within the framework of healthy boundaries? Well, I think your sponsor is correct. I think going slowly is a very good idea. And I don't think you should wait years to reveal your sexual orientation to your partner. I think, when you have an appropriate dating plan, when you're taking time to get to know someone, when you're starting to decide whether this is somebody that you want to be in relationship with, or maybe your plan allows for casual sex, I don't know. But certainly when you're at the relationship stage, that's when you talk about STIs, you talk about birth control, you talk about your recovery, whether you're in AA or DA or GA or SAA or whatever. That's when you also start to talk about your sexual preferences. And maybe it's not the first time you have sex, or even, the fifth time you have sex. But as you get into a relationship with someone, you don't want to wait too long, probably around the third or fourth month. It's an important thing to let your partner know, but you certainly don't want to talk about this on the first date. It's just too much information, too fast. It's sort of like revealing that you're in recovery on the first date. The person doesn't have a context for it. They don't know you. And so you can scare people off really quickly by giving too much information too fast. So do be judicious about that. So someone says, I forgot to mention that I belong to a support group for men who are married and out to their wives. This is the guy who mentioned the mixed orientation marriage. That's great. The resource is How, and is Husbands Out Wives, and the web page is how.support.org. This group was extremely helpful to me and others that are in this situation. I think that's great, Randy, because increasingly I'm just seeing more and more and more men that have been in long-term marriages with children that are gay and have known they were gay from the time they got married. And at some point when people start to reach their late 40s, early 50s, they're like, wow, I've been lying about this for so long and I don't know how to reconcile it. And it's just amazing to me how much people are willing to, be creative, work things out, be honest about who they are and what they do and don't like and what they can and can't live with. So I think it's great that there is such a resource for people. And I commend you and your wife for working this through and however you have. Someone says, is there a way to re-educate the brain on sexuality? If sexual abuse I received as a child led me to practicing homosexuality, how to completely align myself with being heterosexual? I feel like my brain needs rewiring because of the abuse and years of pornography addiction where I consume same-sex videos. And, I would say that's a challenging thing, Amanda, because your nervous system is now fused with those same-sex images. So the arousal system is what we call autonomic arousal. There's an autonomic nervous system, which is the primary nervous system of the body, and the central nervous system, which is the primary nervous system of the brain and the spinal cord, and certainly they relate to the body. But when you're a child and you're being sexually assaulted, there's fear, there's adrenaline, and there's high arousal. And arousal doesn't mean that that you are lubricating or that you have an erection if you're male. But those sexual arousal systems are tied to the bodily based arousal system. And shame is often infused in that too. And then you get what you're pointing to, which is what we call a repetition compulsion. You keep looking at those same images that happen to you over and over again and masturbating to them. And then you get these networks in your brain that wire together very tenaciously. So if it's shaming, if it's female, if you feel like you're being, denigrated or humiliated, all of that is super arousing to the body. And psychologically, if you're in therapy and you've done a lot of work, you start to know that you feel kind of gross afterwards, and it's really not what you want, but it's so entrained in the body that it's difficult to change those patterns, but you can. And it requires an enormous amount of mindfulness on your part. I mean, first of all, it sounds like you've already done this, but you 100% have to stop looking at those images, those pornographic images that keep wiring that particular arousal pattern together. So that's one thing you have to do. The other thing you have to do is when you're masturbating or when you're having sex with your preferred orientation, you have to stop those thoughts when they pop into your head. And it's tricky because they're very tenacious, and not shame yourself or hate yourself because it's happening. So in that moment, you would stop. If you would stop the rhythm or the thrusting of the sex, and you would make eye contact with your partner, you would look at his face, feel his skin, smell his neck, do something to bring yourself back into the present moment. And that's what you can do on your own as a mindfulness practice. And then really do some work with body-oriented psychotherapists, whether it's somatic experiencing or sensory motor psychotherapy, even EMDR targets that help you start to change those patterns in the brain. But most importantly, I think it's crucial that you practice self-compassion, that you not beat yourself up because these images are still popping into your head, because your brain is just wired the way it's wired. Let's see, someone says, I'm a therapist and work with middle-aged children. What are best practices for supporting clients at this age as they explore their sexuality, especially when their parents may not approve of this exploration? Well, I think that's super challenging when you've got, you don't have parental agreement. And so I think the safest way always is to ask self-reflexive, space-opening questions. Like, what does it mean if Susie holds Jane's hands? And what is it about that you like? And what does that mean to you? And what would your mom and dad say? And what scares you about telling them? So being curious about the child's experience and the meaning they're making of it, and not shaming them in any way. You know, it's so funny because in European cultures forever, and even today, I mean, in India, you can see grown men holding hands as they're walking down the street because they're friends, not because they're gay. You see this with girls also. You know, they're constantly touching each other in other cultures, just as an act of love, filial friendship, love, not where we're so, you know, after like elementary school, if you touch someone else, you must be gay. And then that gets used in a pejorative manner, especially in middle school, where boys call each other, you know, derogatory names, which is unfortunate because that's the age of sexuality where people are coming into their sexuality and they're trying to figure out, well, am I gay? Am I straight? Am I somewhere in the middle? What does that mean? So I appreciate that as a therapist, you really want to be curious about this with these kids. And I think that's the best you can do if you don't have parental permission. So someone says, can we talk about the differences in societal views of women loving women versus men loving men, especially in the context of bi or pansexuality? Because bi women get stereotypes of being slutty or always seeking threesomes. Not that there's anything wrong with either one of those. And bi men get stereotyped as beta males are probably gay. And bi pan people face a stereotype of being promiscuous cheaters. These stereotypes often keep people in the closet. Therefore, some people who might call themselves straight, though they have same-sex attraction, often choose their straight label based on a desire to avoid being stereotyped or shamed. How can people come to terms with this? Well, I mean, that's really a loaded question, Nancy, because that is a socio-political question. And that goes back to, you know, what I was talking about and what we see in this entry today in Mirror of Intimacy. It's because of social rejection, because we always collapse down into meaning making. And this is the nature of the left brain, is that we look for patterns. We want to know. If someone says, well, I enjoy having sex with both women and men, then immediately the left brain swoops in and says, oh, you must be bisexual. And the person says, I never said I was bisexual. I just said I can enjoy it either way. And so we want to put labels on things and box things and know things. And then we judge it because we're so terrified of it and afraid of what it means or what people are going to think and say. And so that exposure to vulnerability is what I think keeps a lot of people quiet about what's what. And that's why I think when you're dating, or even when you're in a relationship over time, to have these conversations about, you know, what really turns you on? What do you like about that? I'll tell you, I wrote a paper for the American Journal of Play a couple of years ago, and my topic was on the difference between playing and preying, P-R-E-Y, as in predatory behaviors. And I investigated rape fantasy, which is the #1 fantasy of women between ages of 20 and 40. And there's lots of documentation about this. And there are many, many theories about why this is. But these same women who are super turned on by the fantasy of rape would never in 1 million years ever want to be raped. And that's the difference between fantasy and actuality. What goes on in our minds? Why don't we share this with our sex partners, whether we're single or we're in a long-term marriage? And why is it when we're in long-term marriages, we think that the person we're having sex with 20 years later is the same person we were having sex with 20 years before, and they must just like the same thing they always did? I mean, how many of you are still eating the same food you were eating 20 years ago? Or, you know, wearing the same clothes you were wearing 20 years ago? Like, our hairstyles change, our food tastes change, our ways in which we vacation change. Like, everything changes, but we never talk about how our sexuality changes because that's just too embarrassing or shaming or taboo. And so this is why I appreciate so many of you showing up for this conversation, because the way it changes is one conversation at a time. It starts with you talking to your lover about, hey, what turns you on? Like, what if we just hang out tonight and talk about our sexual fantasies, or what turn us on, or what we might like to do? And it doesn't mean we're ever going to do it, or we're ever going to act it out. Just the act of talking about it sometimes can be super arousing. So don't make this black or white, either or. See if you can let yourself play in the gray areas of possibility and conversation, because there are no mind crimes. As long as it's in your head or your imagination, that's the realm of the erotic. And when you start to talk about it with your partner, that's the way you can evoke eroticism. And you might be surprised at how arousing something is that seemed otherwise taboo or gruesome or freaky or weird, but nobody ever has to know about it but the two of you. And it doesn't mean even that you would actually repeat that fantasy again. It may be that you got that out of the way, and that's that. So someone writes, what are your thoughts on asking someone's sexual orientation on intake forms for treatment, more so treatment for substance abuse and or mental health issues, not specifically sexual issues? Is this too intrusive, or is it more helpful, or being respectful of preferences? Well, I actually think it's smart and helpful, because if somebody is in recovery for substances, one of the things we know about chemical dependency and substance abuse is that people lose their sobriety faster than anything when they get involved in relationships too early in their sobriety. And so you want to be checking in with them about their sexual behaviors. If they're in a relationship, if they're trying to date and they've got like 30 days, sober from alcohol or drugs, because oftentimes when people are, in their alcoholism or drug addiction, they're choosing people that are also drinking and using. And if they end up hooking up with someone who's in active addiction, that person will have drugs, or they'll drink with them and they lose their sobriety. So I think it's important to ask about sex and sexuality issues when you're working in the field of chemical dependency, because as you know, addicts are often multiply addicted. And not all people in recovery from alcohol are sex addicts by any means, but some of them can be sex and love addicts. And then asking about sexual orientation helps to clue you in into, who they would possibly be having sex with should they choose to be sexual in early sobriety, and then helping them really look at how prudent it might be for them to not date for 6 months until they've got some real sobriety under their belt, so their recovery doesn't get derailed. And then you can also help them with a dating plan and choosing good people and all of that. So I see them as intertwined, not separate. You. As a single, primarily heterosexual 30-year-old woman, I have comfortably explored sexual relationships with girlfriends I'm close to in the past year. However, I feel the need to explain myself to family members who are not as flexible in their binary-based thinking, asking questions like, how long have you known this? And saying, that's not who she really is. Authentically communicating is tough when I don't have the language around what feels like not gay lesbian, but open intimately. I'm doing my best to not feel responsible for others' confusion as I navigate my own, having to dig deep for self-compassion to change the patterns of ancestral shame, right? Well, I would say, as a 30-year-old woman, you want to ask yourself, how much do your family members really need to know about your sex life? If you've got a sister, if you've got siblings, that's one thing, but parents, you don't really need to be sharing your sex life with your parents at this age. If you have siblings, I think it's about you just being authentically honest and saying, I'm not naming myself one way or the other, that when I meet the right person for me, when I'm ready to or want to be in a relationship, say a monogamous committed relationship, then I'll let you know. But for now, for me, pleasure is pleasure. And I enjoy the relationships I have with people and the experiences I have with people. And so I'm going to ask you, if you love me, to reserve your judgment of that and to see if you can get more curious about my experiences so you can get to know me instead of me feeling like I always have to defend myself and prove something. Can you do that for me? and see what your family members say about that. And if they can't do it, then that leaves you unable to really talk to them about what your experiences are, and you'll have to save that for your friends. And now we have someone who writes, can you talk about how to help bisexual clients manage healthy friendships when they may be experiencing sexual attraction to their closest friends of either sex without that attraction being returned? This seems most common with this group because a close friend can feel safe and intimate and easily progress to sexual attraction. Well, I would question why that person is sexualizing all of their relationships, for starters. Because just because somebody is interested in you and they're a friend does not mean that you should be having sex with them. And why does that even come into the picture all of the time? Because, you know, sometimes falling in love with our best friend is the best choice we can make, because the thing that makes lovers unique from best friends is that lovers have sex with each other. Romantic relationships should be best friends. The person that has your back, that keeps you secure, that you trust more than anyone in the world. And they also are the person you're most attracted to and you want to be sexual with. So there is a line there between the two. But why would this client, even if they identify as bisexual, feel like every single person in their life is fair game for sex? There's a lack of discernment there. And there's also a high level of sexualizing other people, as opposed to really being in the intimacy. And what I mean by that is the relationship of the person. Who is this person? Do we share similar values? Do I actually like them? Do they have a good sense of humor, or whatever my value system is? Or am I just, you know, being run by my sexual arousal all the time? In which case you could have sex with everybody all the time. So I think you might want to have a conversation about discernment there. So we've covered a lot that's been in this entry from Mirror of Intimacy today about, you know, how people condemn identities, how we can be colonized by our trauma, and what we need to do to let go of black and white thinking and open up to the mystery and possibility of life. So I want to encourage all of you that you know, to challenge your identity if you have had an attraction to same sex. It certainly does not mean you have to have sex with the same sex, but to ask yourself, what would it be like to try it on for size and to see if that's you or not you, and to walk in the shoes of other people today, to notice when somebody is really different than you are, even if it's their sexual orientation or their gender identity or what have you, and to exercise compassion and open-mindedness, and just remember that we're all the same. If we weren't all the same, we wouldn't all be locked down the world over, because we can all get this virus. And today, show your solidarity, if you can, as a proud member of the LGBTQA community, and be an ally for people that are different. And be more transparent about your own differences to all of your friends and family. Don't be afraid to, unless of course your family is going to be toxic about it, but certainly to your friend group, to be just, you know, to chat casually, you know, over dinner about how, you know, you're interested in, or you've had the possibility, or you have had same-sex experiences, and get people talking about this, because it's through these conversations that changes happen. So thank you all for your robust participation in this webinar. It was really a lot of fun. And I wish you all the best. I hope that you're staying safe, that you're practicing compassion while you are in this period of lockdown, and also practicing deep gratitude and holding a space of love and life for those who are suffering right now. So I look forward to seeing you all next month. Take good care and be well.